The message echoed across the stars, intercepted by every species in the known galaxy. It was simple, uncompromising, final. We tried peace. Now you see what that got us. Now we show you war. The Galactic Council watched in horror as thousands of human warships emerged from the void, silent, black as death, and armed with weapons the universe had never seen before. Humanity had spent decades pretending to be docile, integrating into galactic society as traders and diplomats. It was a lie. A deception so vast, so complete, that no one had seen it coming. Now, the facade was gone. And the galaxy was about to learn what happened when humans stopped pretending to be civilized. The transmission echoed across the stars, a signal so cold and precise that it sent ripples of dread through every species tuned into the galactic relay. We tried peace. There was no emotion in the voice. No rage. No sorrow. Just a statement of fact. Now you see what that got us. It was the first message from humanity in nearly a week, ever since Earth had gone silent. Ever since the Moloch Dominion had turned its weapons upon them, raining down fire and destruction upon the homeworld of a species that had once sworn off war. Now we show you war. The signal cut. And in its absence, the void felt heavier. On the Galactic Council's capital world of Vornus Prime, Chancellor Chvial of the Zurich's Dominion stared at the vast holographic display, his twin hearts pounding. Across the chamber, representatives of the council sat frozen. Some of them, those with the intelligence to recognize the enormity of what had just happened, had already gone pale. We should send an envoy, croaked Councillor Vrax, his voice betraying his uncertainty. Perhaps there is still a chance for diplomacy? The grand strategist of the coalition, a reptilian being from the Car Syndicate, exhaled sharply. Diplomacy? He turned his slit-pupiled gaze toward Vrax. The Moloch burned their homeworld to the ground. Do you believe they will shake hands after that? But they have no standing military, interjected Ambassador Quarix of the Thalari Commonwealth, her beady black eyes wide with disbelief. The Council made sure of that. Their fleets were disbanded. Their weapons decommissioned. It is impossible for them to mount an offensive. Then who sent that message? Growled Warlord Kostor, his thick fur bristling. A dying race does not speak with such certainty. They do not issue threats. Tvial's mandibles clicked, his mind racing through the implications. Humanity had played along with the Council's mandates. They had integrated, cooperated, submitted to the peace accords like all other species. They had even embraced diplomacy, proving themselves as exceptional mediators, brilliant engineers, and adaptive strategists. But never warriors. Never conquerors. And yet, a cold, sinking feeling spread through his chest. He turned to the Fleet Command Overseer, a withered elder from the Rithai Imperium. How long until our long-range sensors detect any human fleet activity? The Overseer hesitated. Then, his ancient features twisted into something deeply unsettling. Tvial, he rasped. The sensors have already detected them. A silence more deafening than any explosion followed. Then, the room erupted in chaos. The first human strike came without warning. Moloch Fortress worlds, the strongholds that had stood for centuries, ceased to exist within hours. Their planetary shields, thought to be impenetrable, collapsed instantly as an unseen force hacked their defense grids, turning them against their own people. Orbital stations went dark. Then they turned, firing on their own fleets. Moloch High Command sent desperate distress calls. There was no response. Their admirals screamed for reinforcements. None came. On the war-torn surface of Xeris IV, the Moloch's most fortified military colony, Admiral Gorvash of the Dominion stood on the command deck of his planetary defense base, tusks bared as the unthinkable unfolded before him. His people had been warriors for thousands of years. They had never known fear. But today, fear was all that remained. They have not fired a single shot, he growled, his deep voice trembling despite himself. His officers, seasoned warriors bred for combat, stood frozen at their stations. The holographic tactical feed displayed a nightmare unfolding in real time. The human warships had emerged from the void, blacker than space itself, silent, and impossibly fast. Gorvash had expected crude human vessels, bulky, outdated remnants of a long-forgotten military past. But these were ghosts. Predators. Designed for one thing: annihilation. He turned toward his tactical officer. "Launch all planetary defenses. Do it now." The officer didn't respond. Gorvash snarled, stepping forward, then stopped as he saw the Moloch's 6 yellow eyes wide with horror. He followed the officer's gaze to the tactical display. And for the first time in his life, Admiral Gorvash knew true terror. The human warships were already on the ground. Not landing. Not deploying. They were already inside the defense perimeter. That was impossible. They had seen nothing enter the atmosphere. There had been no landing sequences, no descent alerts, no heat signatures. The enemy was just there. A cold whisper cut through the command center, transmitted directly into their comms. "You should have killed us all." And then the base's shields collapsed. The entire planetary grid went offline. And hell arrived. From the heart of the human fleet, drop pods rained down, not carrying soldiers, but machines. Autonomous war drones, sleek and lethal, surgically erased every defensive structure within seconds. Gorvash barely had time to react before something moved behind him. Something that had not been there before. He turned, tusks bared, only to stare into the void. A human soldier stood before him, clad in black armor that absorbed light, his face obscured behind a sleek helmet. Gorvash reached for his weapon. The human was faster. A single kinetic blade, vibrating at a frequency that made the air scream, severed his arm before he could blink. He collapsed, roaring in agony. The human knelt beside him, voice calm. "Cold. Do you feel it now?" the soldier murmured. Gorvash's eyes blurred. His blood pooled on the floor. "The fear?" The soldier leaned closer, his helmet retracting just enough to reveal a scarred human face. Not an executioner. Not a warlord. Just a man. "This is what you brought upon yourselves." Then, the final transmission from Ceres 4 played across every channel in the galaxy. It was not a distress call. It was a warning. From the Moloch to the Council. "We made a mistake. We thought they were weak. They were never weak. They were waiting." A long silence followed. Then, the next message came. Not from the Moloch. Not from the humans. But from the Galactic Council itself. "Humanity has abandoned peace. And now, doom is coming." The transmission had shattered the illusion of safety, and now the council chambers echoed with frantic voices. Dozens of species, once comfortable in their power, were now reduced to a panicked rabble. No one had expected a response from humanity, not like this. Chancellor Tvial slammed a fist onto the table, his mandibles clicking in frustration. "How did we not see this coming?" His voice carried across the chamber, silencing some of the chaos. "How did an entire species fool us? Where is our intelligence division? Where is our fleet command?" A hologram flickered to life in the center of the chamber. Fleet Marshal Doric, leader of the Council's defense forces, materialized, his expression grim. "We have a problem." "No, really?" sneered Warlord Kostor, his fur bristling. Doric ignored him. "The human fleet has just appeared on the edges of Council space. We don't know how. There were no warp signatures, no FTL traces. One moment, nothing. The next, they were there." Tvial stiffened. "Numbers?" Doric's expression darkened. "Too many." Silence. Counselor Vrax, still clinging to the hope that this was some elaborate misunderstanding, cleared his throat. "Surely, they're here to negotiate. We must send a delegation. Offer them." "Offer them what?" Doric cut him off. "We stood by while their home burned. We let the Moloch butcher their people. You think a delegation is going to fix that?" Ambassador Korix's voice wavered. "What do they want?" The answer came not from Doric, but from the fleet itself. Every council world received the same message, broadcast across all channels, overriding security protocols. A simple text transmission, sent from a fleet that shouldn't exist. You let our world burn. Now we let yours. Panic gripped the council chamber. Some representatives fled outright, running for their personal transports. Others tried desperately to reach their homeworlds, issuing emergency orders for evacuations. But deep down, they all knew. It was too late. The human fleet did not engage in war. War implied struggle, resistance, the possibility of defeat. What they brought was annihilation. The first strike was swift, precise. The Council's military headquarters on Voron 6, a fortress world thought to be impregnable, was the first to fall. Orbital bombardments? Inefficient. Humanity rewrote the planet's gravity well, collapsing the entire defense grid in a matter of seconds. The Council's finest strategists, their most advanced AI war engines, all vanished into the crushing void. Not a single human soldier had set foot on the surface. Admiral Elias Voss stood aboard the command deck of the Havoc, watching as the first phase of the operation completed. His hands rested behind his back, posture rigid, expression unreadable. Around him, his officers moved with lethal efficiency. A tactical officer turned to him. Voron 6 is gone, sir. Enemy fleet movements detected near the Arlax Nebula. Estimated time to interception, 6 hours. Voss didn't look away from the viewport. 6 hours? He exhaled through his nose. Slow. The officer hesitated. Sir? Voss turned, eyes sharp. They should be faster. They should be more prepared. His voice was quiet, but every officer within earshot felt the weight behind it. They had years to prepare for something like this. And yet, he gestured at the wreckage of Voron 6, still collapsing into its own gravity. They didn't. They never thought we'd fight back. The bridge remained silent. Voss returned his gaze to the void. Deploy Phase 2. Phase 2 was terror. The Council's fleet reserves were stationed across 3 core systems. Heavily fortified. Defended by planetary shields so strong that no known weapon could breach them. But the humans did not breach them. They turned them against their own people. No one understood how. One moment, the Council's flagship, Pride of Vornis, was organizing a counteroffensive. The next, their own defensive AI systems activated against them. Energy cannons, planetary defense batteries, everything fired at their own ships. Entire fleets burned in an instant. The remaining ships tried to retreat. They were not allowed. The transmission came through before the final slaughter. One voice. Unshaken. Uncompromising. Elias Voss. We are not conquerors. We are not invaders. We are not here to take your worlds. We are here to end this. The Council's admirals pleaded for terms. There were none. The human fleet moved through the remaining defenses with surgical precision, leaving no survivors. Back on Vornis Prime, the Council's leaders gathered in what remained of their chambers. Chancellor Tvial had lost his voice. The others refused to speak. A holofeed displayed the wreckage of their finest fleets, their strongest worlds reduced to lifeless husks. And then, another transmission. The final one. It was Elias Voss himself this time. No more text. No more warnings. His face appeared sharp, cold, eyes dark with purpose. His voice carried across every remaining Council world, every surviving fleet. You thought peace made us weak. He leaned forward slightly, as if ensuring they could hear every word. You thought we forgot how to fight. How to win. He tilted his head. Didn't you wonder why we never made war? A pause. A moment of crushing silence. Then, it wasn't because we couldn't. His voice lowered, dangerously calm. It was because we were waiting. His final words were not a threat. They were a promise. You will never attack us again. The transmission ended. The human fleet disappeared into the void. And for the first time in history, the Galactic Council knew fear. The silence in the Galactic Council chamber was suffocating. The assembled leaders of 1,000 worlds sat in stunned horror, watching the remains of their greatest fleet drift lifeless in space. Their proud flagships, shattered. Their admirals, silenced. Their war engines, turned against them in a massacre so precise, so absolute, that it barely qualified as war. It was a purge. Chancellor Tvial felt his claws trembling against the cold metal of the console before him. He had ruled for over 2 centuries, navigating crises, forging alliances, keeping peace. Peace. The very word now felt like an illusion, a fragile dream that humanity had shattered in a single, calculated strike. How? The voice came from Councillor Vrax, but it may as well have been a whisper from the entire chamber. How did we let this happen? Fleet Marshal Doric, the most decorated strategist in the Council's history, sat in rigid silence. His eyes remained fixed on the feed of the ruined fleet, as if by sheer will, he could undo the events of the past 12 hours. They were never defenseless. His voice, normally a deep growl of authority, barely rose above a murmur. We thought we disarmed them, but they were hiding in plain sight. Ambassador Corix's voice shook. They waited decades for this. Longer. Doric turned to her, his expression hollow. We studied them. We believed their instincts for war were gone. But the truth? They restrained themselves. They held back. Until now. A shiver ran through the chamber. The realization was horrifying. Humanity hadn't lost its edge. They had merely been patient. Tvial forced himself to stand. Then what is left? We still have worlds. Fleets. We must retaliate. A hollow laugh escaped from Warlord Kostor. It was a humorless, bitter thing, devoid of any confidence. And what exactly will we fight? He gestured toward the wreckage still displayed on the hollow feeds. Every attempt at resistance lasted seconds. Our strongest fortifications turned to dust. Our fleets, hacked, subverted, used against us. He bared his teeth. You do not fight something like that. You survive it. A cold certainty settled over the room. This was not a war they could win. A new transmission cut through their desperate murmurs. No encryption, no codes, a direct feed, overriding all council security. A single figure appeared. Elias Voss. His presence dominated the chamber even through the hollow feed. His uniform was pristine, but his eyes told the story of a man who had seen everything. When he spoke, it was without rage, without cruelty. His voice was steel, cold, and absolute. You have no fleets left. The truth, delivered like a death sentence. You have no weapons that can stop us. A quiet intake of breath from several counselors. No one dared argue. Voss's expression never wavered. You assumed we would negotiate. That we would demand concessions, reparations, an apology. A pause. A sharp inhale from someone in the chamber. We don't want an apology. The weight of those words crushed the last remnants of hope from the council. We don't want your surrender. We don't want your tribute. We don't want your worlds. Tvial's claws dug into the console, his mind reeling. Then, what? What did they want? We want you to understand. A flicker of static. The hollow feed shifted. A new image appeared beside Voss, Earth. Not the ruins the council had last seen. Not the smoking husk left behind by the Moloch's assault. But Earth as it had been. Cities teeming with life. Oceans stretching endlessly. Skies untouched by war. And then, frame by frame, it changed. The bombardments. The destruction. The screams. Billions, wiped away in days. The council was forced to watch. You let this happen, Voss said. No accusation. Just fact. You had the power to stop it. You didn't. A shift in the feed. Images of the Moloch homeworld, before humanity's counterstrike. A thriving empire of warriors who had seen themselves as invincible. Then the aftermath. The counselors recoiled at the sight. Nothing remained. Not ruins. Not survivors. Not even atmosphere. A world had been erased. We are not conquerors. Voss's voice carried no satisfaction, no triumph. "We are the consequence." Chancellor Tvile, his throat dry, finally forced words out. "And now what?" A long silence. Then Voss spoke again. "Now?" His gaze hardened. "Now we leave." A ripple of confusion swept through the chamber. Fleet Marshal Doric leaned forward. "Leave? You thought we wanted power," Voss said. "You assumed we'd replace you, reshape the galaxy in our image." He shook his head. "We have no interest in ruling you." Another pause. "But if you ever threaten us again, if you even think about harming another human world..." His voice dropped to a quiet, lethal promise. "There will be nothing left to salvage." The transmission ended. The chamber sat in stunned, absolute silence. And one by one, the leaders of the Galactic Council came to the same realization. Humanity had walked away. Not out of mercy. Not out of forgiveness. But because they no longer considered the Galactic Council relevant. And somehow, that was the most terrifying outcome of all. The bridge of the Havoc was silent. No celebration. No satisfaction. Just the quiet hum of the warship as it drifted through the wreckage of the Council's last great fleet. The screens around Admiral Elias Voss displayed victory, but there was no joy in it, only certainty. The work was done. His officers stood at attention, waiting for his command. He let the silence linger a moment longer before speaking. "Status report." Commander Lorne, his second-in-command, straightened. "All primary targets neutralized. No enemy fleets remain in operational condition. The remaining Council forces are scattered, leaderless." Voss exhaled, nodding. "And the transmissions?" "Every surviving Council world received it," Lorne confirmed. "They understand." A slow nod. "Good." Silence again. It was strange. They had won. Completely. Decisively. The greatest powers in the galaxy had fallen before them, reduced to nothing in the span of days. And yet, it didn't feel like a victory. Lorne shifted. "Sir, permission to speak freely?" Voss turned to him. "Always." Lorne hesitated. "Shouldn't we finish it?" The question hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Voss studied his officer carefully. Lorne had been with him for years, a soldier through and through, forged in the ashes of Earth's fall. He wasn't bloodthirsty. He wasn't cruel. But he, like every other human in this fleet, knew that the enemy had not deserved mercy. But this wasn't about mercy. Voss folded his arms behind his back. "If we finish it, what comes next?" Lorne blinked, thrown off by the question. "We win." Voss nodded. "And then?" Lorne's jaw tightened. "Then we decide how the galaxy runs." Voss's voice was quiet, but firm. "We already did." Lorne frowned. "Sir?" Voss gestured toward the viewport. "Look at them." Beyond the hull of the Havoc, the shattered remnants of the Council's fleet drifted lifeless. Ships that had once patrolled the galaxy with authority now lay broken and adrift, their insignias scorched, their weapons silent. Voss turned back to Lorne. "They thought they were untouchable. That their power was absolute. That they could dictate the rules of the universe, determine who lived and who died." His expression hardened. "They believed they were above consequence." Lorne swallowed, nodding slowly. "They understand now," Voss said. "That's all that matters." Lorne wasn't fully convinced. "But what if they come back? What if they regroup in a century and try again?" Voss smirked, but it wasn't amusement. It was something colder. Sharper. "They won't." Lorne frowned. "You're sure?" Voss turned back to the viewport. "When a child touches fire and gets burned, do they go back for more?" Lorne had no answer. Voss nodded toward the console. "Prepare the fleet. We're leaving." Lorne hesitated again. "Just like that?" "Just like that." Lorne exhaled, accepting it, though a part of him would always wonder. Always question. But he had followed Voss this far. He would follow him again. "Aye, sir." The orders were given. The fleet adjusted course. The war was over. And humanity was gone. Chancellor Tvile stood in the ruins of the council chamber, his hands resting on the shattered remains of the great table where the most powerful beings in the galaxy had once dictated the fate of civilizations. Now it was empty. Silent. The holographic displays flickered weakly, the once great network of council-controlled systems now fractured beyond repair. The fleets were gone. The war was lost. And yet, humanity had not claimed the throne. They had simply left. Tvile could not comprehend it. His entire life, he had believed in power as structure, authority as control. You ruled, or you were ruled. That was the way of things. But the humans had shattered that logic. They had won without claiming dominion. They had dominated without demanding tribute. They had burned the entire system to the ground, and then walked away, leaving the survivors to rebuild in the shadow of their warning. Tvile turned to the remaining council members, those who had survived the purges, the bombings, the precision strikes that had brought their empire to its knees. Their faces were still twisted with the same question. What now? He exhaled. The humans have left. Warlord Kazdor scoffed. And? Tvile met his gaze. And we need to make sure they never come back. Silence. Then slow, grim nods. Because they all understood. If humanity ever returned, it would not be as conquerors. It would be as executioners. The havoc drifted beyond the last known star charts, its fleet in formation behind it. The known galaxy was behind them now, nothing but a distant, dying light. Lorne stood beside Voss at the viewport, watching as their ships moved further into the unknown. You think they'll rebuild? Lorne asked. Voss nodded. They'll have no choice. And if they forget? Voss smirked. Then we'll remind them. A long pause. Lorne exhaled. We could have taken everything. Voss's voice was quiet. We already did. The fleet surged forward, vanishing into the void. And the galaxy would never forget. The void stretched endlessly before them, a sea of darkness unbroken by stars. The havoc drifted at the head of the fleet, engines silent, weapons cold. The war was over. Humanity had won. And yet, there was no triumph, no cheers, no celebration, just the quiet hum of a species stepping out of history. Admiral Elias Voss stood at the command deck, hands clasped behind his back, eyes locked on the tactical readout. A battlefield that no longer existed. A war fought in days, but planned over decades. The Galactic Council's fleets had been erased, their empire fractured beyond repair. And yet, he felt nothing. Commander Lorne stepped up beside him, his expression unreadable. They still don't understand, he muttered. Voss didn't look at him. Who? The Council. The survivors. Lorne exhaled. They're too used to thinking in terms of power. They don't understand why we left. Voss finally turned, meeting his second-in-command's gaze. They don't need to understand. They only need to fear. Lorne studied him for a moment. And if that fear fades? Voss smirked, but there was no humor in it. Then we come back. A pause. Lorne's gaze drifted back to the silent fleet beyond. You think they'll rebuild? They'll try, Voss said simply. The Council may be broken, but the survivors will form something new. They have no choice. Lorne shook his head. We should have finished it. Voss turned back to the viewport, watching the last remnants of the known galaxy drift further behind them. No, he said. That's exactly what they expected us to do. Conquer. Rule. Demand fealty. His voice was quiet, but firm. We gave them something worse. Lorne frowned. And that is? Voss's expression darkened. Irrelevance. The weight of that truth settled between them. The Galactic Council had ruled for thousands of years, shaping the laws of the stars, deciding the fates of species. They had believed themselves eternal. And in a matter of days, humanity had made them obsolete. No rulers. No conquerors. No gods. Just ghosts, left to pick through the ashes of their own arrogance. Lorne exhaled. What now? Voss didn't answer immediately. His gaze lingered on the vast nothingness ahead. Then, finally, he spoke. We disappear. Lorne blinked. That's it. Voss nodded. We came out of nowhere. We'll go back to nowhere. Lorne hesitated, then glanced at the silent bridge crew, each one awaiting orders. And if someone comes looking for us? Voss's voice was steel. They won't like what they find. Chancellor Tvile sat in the ruined chamber of the Galactic Council, his claws tracing the cracks in the once pristine surface of the command table. The room was eerily quiet. So many voices had once filled it, arguing, negotiating, deciding the future of the galaxy. Now it was empty. His own reflection stared back at him in the polished glass of the broken holodisplays. He barely recognized himself. His robes, once immaculate, were torn and stained with ash. His face, once composed and wise, was hollowed by the weight of failure. The others had left. Some fled to their homeworlds, desperate to rebuild. Others had chosen exile, unable to face what had happened. And the rest were dead. Tvile closed his eyes. The humans had spared them. That was the part that haunted him most. Not the destruction of their fleets. Not the loss of their control. Not even the fear that still clawed at the edges of his mind. It was that humanity had chosen to leave. They could have ruled. They could have crushed what remained of the Council and taken their place. They could have built their own empire. But they didn't. Instead, they had simply vanished. Tvile opened his eyes and looked around the chamber, taking in the empty seats, the broken displays, the shattered pride of a 1,000-year empire. What had they left behind? Nothing. And nothing was worse than destruction. The transmission played in his mind again. The last words of Elias Voss. We don't want your empire. We don't want your surrender. We only want you to remember. Tvile shuddered. Because he would remember. They all would. For the rest of time. The galaxy was silent. Humanity had gone. And in their absence, the universe was left with a single, terrifying truth. They had never needed the Galactic Council. The Council had needed them. And now, without them, the galaxy was alone. The stars burned. The void stretched endlessly. And far beyond the edges of known space, humanity watched.